You're listening to a podcast from the BBC World Service. This is Hard Talk with me, Stephen Sacker. Dustin Black, welcome to Hard Talk.
Thank you for having me.
To what extent do you think that your experiences from childhood to now as a gay person have come to define your creative output?
Oh boy, it's one of the many things about me that does define me creatively. Certainly when I'm teaching my students, because I teach some classes in screenwriting sometimes, and I say to them, tell me about you. What is it about you that's unique? Where do you come from? What are you interested in? Tell me about your parents, your background. These are the things that make you incredibly unique. And those things that make you unique could actually make you marketable in this very competitive film business, and you could succeed. I think far too often writers and filmmakers try to go for what's profitable, what's hot at the moment, and the truth of that is you're going to get your butt kicked in the end because someone else is going to be very passionate about that subject.
So at the core of you and your sort of self-identity, being gay is a really important part of that.
Sure, being gay is a big part of that because that has a connection to love and who I love and who I spend my life with and the family that I'm going to build. But also where I grew up in the United States probably formed who I am. So growing up in the South, in a very conservative atmosphere, growing up in the military, and understanding what that meant.
But the two are woven together in a sense, because I think it's right to say that you had an awareness of being different and of being gay, whether you put it that way to yourself or not. You had an awareness that you were different very early in your childhood.
Oh, sure.
And that was something that, in the community you came from, the religion that you were born into, that was tough.
You mean with the Mormons? Yeah.
Well, your mum was a pretty observant Mormon, wasn't she?
My mom, my father's entire side of the family were very devout Mormon. I was very devout Mormon growing up. So I believed what I was hearing, including around 7 years old, the church beamed in the Mormon prophet from Salt Lake City. We were living out in Texas, and they lowered a screen, and his white-haired, face came on that screen, very, very imposing.
As close to God as you could probably get.
I mean, it was very godlike. It was very intimidating. And I'll never forget him saying, next to the sin of murder comes the sin of sexual impurity, homosexuality. Now, I might not have known what that meant at that moment, but I soon learned. At first, I thought it was just a fabulous new Scrabble word because it had an X in it and all those syllables. But soon I learned it meant that I would bring great shame to myself and to my family if anyone found out that I had a crush on the boy down the street, which I did, that I would also be going to hell. I would not be with my Heavenly Father. And that if I did fall in love, it would be something that would have to be hidden, suppressed. Imagine.
That's an enormous darkness to take right through childhood, through adolescence and into early adulthood, without being able to discuss it, really, with anybody.
Yeah, there's no one to discuss it with. Because you'd be in trouble with anyone you discussed it with. If I discussed it in the military, you couldn't even be openly gay in the military at the time. You'd be kicked out. If I discussed it with anyone in our society, which was very conservative of it at the time, I would be in great trouble. In some places, it was still a crime.
You'd sort of be expelled.
I would certainly be expelled from the things that create community where I'm from. So from my church and from my neighborhood and from my school, I would be a pariah. And that creates isolation, and that isolation makes young, talented LGBTQ people fade and stop trying to excel, stop trying to stick out in positive ways. And for me, that isolation ultimately lent to thoughts of taking my own life. Because you tell a young person that when they first feel love, that's not going to lead to things like dates and the prom or marriage, but that it could lead to prison or electroshock therapy and certainly disownment from your church and your home, you start to wonder, what is the purpose of living?
You took the decision, you came out to your mother. It must have been very difficult, but I think when you were 21.
Yeah, I was 21 years old. I didn't mean to come out. We were living in Washington, D.C. now, and I was just home for Christmas. And we just would sit up and talk all night long. And you have to understand, my mom had been paralyzed from a young age, so she was very different too. But she remained very, very conservative. And at a certain point, I just wasn't giving anything to the conversation. I wasn't speaking, so she filled in all the blanks, and she was very mad about this thing called don't ask, don't tell. which was a law at the time that as long as no one found out you were gay or lesbian
gay in the
military,
as long as you didn't say you were gay.
as long as you kept it quiet, which was basically saying stay in the closet, who you are and what you are is shameful, and it not only hurt the people in the military but their kids. My mom didn't see it that way. She was angry because it let gay or lesbian people in any form. These people she had been taught were, you know, were next to murderers in terms of sin. These people who were wrong and sick and broken, and she just kept going on and on about it. And I came out because at a certain point, even though I was literally praying not to, I could feel the warmth of my tears hit my cheeks. And a good Southern mom can read those tears. She said she knew when I started to cry. I'll get teary just thinking back to that moment, because I didn't want to come out. I wasn't ready to come out. And in fact, that coming out experience, her reaction to it, I'll never forget. She just got very, very quiet, her heart breaking, knowing her son would face some challenges she didn't want him to. And she just said, why? Why would you choose this? Because that's what her thought was. And I'll never forget pointing to her braces and her crutches, because she was paralyzed from polio, on the bed. And I said, Mom, why did you choose those? And she didn't have an answer for that. That was the beginning of our conversation. And it was a conversation that would go on for quite some time. It was not easy. She did not immediately accept me. But there was a lot of unlearning that had to be done. A lot of that unlearning happened when she met my gay and lesbian friends, when she came to my graduation from UCLA's film school. And she started to hear the stories of actual gay and lesbian young people. And they didn't match up to what she'd heard from that Mormon prophet or from the military or from the state at the time. Those personal stories, not political stories, not stories about the Constitution or science, but those personal stories from these young people and myself eventually erased the generations of homophobia she'd learned from the church and from the state. And it was gone. And I'll never forget, after a night near my graduation when she'd spent an entire evening with my gay friends, that she finally held me and hugged me. And in those tears, I knew that the lies and the myths and distortions about being gay were gone.
You've just said something that I think is really important. As I've looked at your career, researching, meeting you, your faith in storytelling and the degree to which it can make a difference to the way people see and think. Because I want to take you forward now. You said you went to UCLA Film School, and after that you developed a very successful career writing, screenwriting. And I think by the time you were 30, 31, you had this extraordinary success. You became preoccupied with telling the story of one man, Harvey Milk, who was the first publicly gay elected official in any US city, in San Francisco.
Right.
What was it about the Milk story that you believed could change hearts and minds?
Well, I'll break that down a bit. First off, I think only story can change hearts. And I think only hearts can change minds. That's how I see it. Personal stories can leap over the walls built by politics and by region and by religion and by race, go right through them. So, and I've always believed in the power of story to do that, and I get that from the South. I get that. I learned that from a bunch of conservative Southern folks who like their whiskey and telling stories at night. Secondly, I was lucky enough at a certain point, my mom remarried, and she remarried a good Catholic, which in my country meant he went to church twice a year. And he was much more open-minded, and he also had orders to ship off to the Bay Area in California. And my mom loaded up the car with 3 boys, a cat, and all of our belongings in the trunk, and we took off to California. There, I heard the story of Harvey Milk as a teenager. It was a story of an openly gay man. I didn't even know there was such a thing. I thought, boy, that's a dangerous thing to be. But that's not how his story progressed. His story was that, yes, like you said, he won election. He was winning at the ballot box.
Let me stop you there, because Sean Penn gives this amazing performance as Harvey Milk. We've got a little clip of it, just to give people a sense of what it was like in the 70s when Harvey Milk was making his name.
My name is Harvey Milk, and I'm here to recruit you. I want to recruit you for the fight to preserve your democracy. Brothers and sisters, you must come out. Come out to your parents. Come out to your friends, if indeed they are your friends. Come out to your neighbors. Come out to your fellow workers. Once and for all, let's break down the myths and destroy the lies and distortion.
That's Harvey Milk at the height of his compelling rhetoric. The sad, terrible thing is that no sooner had he won an audience for this powerful message than he was murdered, shot and killed.
That's right.
1977, because he had a lot of enemies. I wonder whether you, from Harvey Milk's life, took the lesson that you were going to have to confront people and difficult things to get your message out there.
Well, I take my lesson from Harvey in many ways. It is that you have to reach out to unexpected allies. And by unexpected, I mean some of those people who you might think are your enemies, if you're going to build the coalitions to create progress. Now, that means looking past yourself. That means looking past your own needs and desires. And I'm not just talking about 1977 and 78 now. I'm talking about 2017. Minorities need to listen to this message that Harvey was preaching, which is, how do you build the coalition of the us's? How do you care for your neighbor as much as you care for your own needs? How do you understand that every single person in this planet right now is a minority in one way or another? It depends on how you slice the pie, and you can help them find the interests they have in your plight if you help them with yours. He went to the union workers, white, working-class union workers who could not afford to put their talented kids through school, and created an alliance with them. And that's how he got elected.
What you've just said to me is incredibly positive, and it's about building alliances and coalitions, perhaps some of them unexpected. But you also have to take things on, and it seems to me one of the things you have done, you've had to do, is to a certain extent confront your own religion and your own background.
Sure.
For example, one of the things you were most active on was Proposition 8. That was the campaign by conservative-led groups to fight very hard to stop gay marriage happening in California, and for a while they were successful.
And my church was leading the way financially.
Exactly. So you had to take the Mormons on, and you made a film about it, which to many people inside the faith that you had been born into was disgraceful, was a betrayal.
I would imagine it was also a revelation to some of them, an eye-opening to many of them. And Reed Cowan, the director of that documentary, called me up and said, would you take part in this? Would you help create this documentary that holds the church accountable for the money they're pouring into the anti-marriage cause? I was a bit nervous, and I did call my mom, and she said, oh boy, oh, here you go again. And I said, yeah, here I go again. But Mom, we're just looking to tell the truth. And I don't know what kind of trouble we can get in if we're just telling the truth. And this was just following the money. That's all we did. And the surprising thing that happened on the other side of that wasn't attack from the Mormon Church, and I give them credit for this. They gave me a phone call and said, would you come down, Brother Black, and speak with us in Salt Lake City? We'd like to meet with you. And learning from the lessons of having come out to my mom and the importance of keeping those channels of communication open, I said yes. And I went to the Mormon Church with a few other folks and met with them, and they invited me to the Mormon Tabernacle Christmas Spectacular, which, if you know the Mormon Church, it's like the Oscars of Mormondom. It's the biggest night of the year, and it is fabulous, the show that they put on. And a group of us took not just ourselves, but some gay and lesbian families and their kids. And what became very evident to the leadership of the church who were with us was that those lesbians and their kids, they were having just as much trouble keeping those kids quiet as the straight couples. The challenges weren't so different. And I'll never forget the white-haired man, one of the leaders of the public relations department of the church, took my hand on the walk out of there. It means a lot to me. And he said, Brother Black, do you want to have a family one day? And I said, yes, I do, of course. I grew up Mormon. I want like 12 or 20 kids. Like, you can take the kid out of the church, but come on. And he just got teary-eyed, and he said, I didn't realize that. And what became clear in the subsequent conversation was that he thought our mission to win marriage was about deinstitutionalization, about breaking down this institution that the Mormon Church holds dear. And what they learned in those days and weeks was that, no, we want our families protected and respected, our kids protected in the same way as straight families' kids. And that's really the bottom line.
That is very interesting. You are talking, although you are now an acclaimed and very well-known campaigner and activist for LGBT rights, you are sounding, in some ways, like a dyed-in-the-wool conservative, particularly when you talk about what marriage means to you.
Well, we have language in common, conservatives and progressives. Progressive folks have kids too. And you put us together with conservatives and we start speaking the same language in many ways.
What is interesting in politics, both in the United States and across much of the West, is the degree to which your particular fight, that you still fight but fought for so long, that is the right to gay marriage, has been won. I mean, if you look at the latest polls in the United States say that I think something like 63% of Americans now believe gay marriage is right and that they accept and embrace it as part of America. Do you think, and you've just made a film called When We Rise, looking back at sort of 40 years and more of struggle for gay rights. Do you feel that you've been filming and reporting and remarking upon a journey that has reached its final destination?
Well, no, absolutely not. Marriage equality came up as the prime mover of our movement rather unexpectedly, likely because of Proposition 8, which caught fire. So me and Rob Reiner and Bruce Cohen and Chad Griffin got together with some folks who were very smart, legal minds, and we sued the state of California in federal court over Proposition 8, saying that marriage was a fundamental right for everyone. And we thought, if we're going to do it right, we are going to hire some unexpected allies. Ted Olson, who was the guy who gave us George W. Bush. He was the lawyer who went to the Supreme Court to give George W. Bush the White House. He also believed in marriage equality. So we had that unique voice teamed up with progressive David Boies. But then what we did was we told stories, personal stories, because we understood that we could go in and get 5 out of 9 votes at the Supreme Court, but if we hadn't changed the culture, it wouldn't make the world safer for LGBT people and their families. So we had to tell stories, not the stories of the Constitution or the law or of science, but of our plaintiffs and their children and the other parents and children who would be affected by this decision. And those are the stories we told in public in those 5 years on the way to the Supreme Court. And the stories of our plaintiffs are what we told in court that not only convinced 5 of 9 judges, but also we watched public opinion change as well. It was really doing what I did with my mom on a massive scale.
Getting back to this point about whether you've reached a destination, that sense of achievement, how deep it runs, Donald Trump is now in the White House. And I just wonder whether what happened in November 2016...
I can barely hear you say those words. It is tough to believe.
You have to confront those words. And I just wonder whether you believe that the election of Donald Trump, and, there are certain things that have already happened. For example, he's rolled back the federal government's previous decision that it would allow transgender kids in public schools to choose which bathroom they wanted to use. That's been rolled back already.
The most vulnerable. He's going after the most vulnerable. It's disgusting. And
well, you say disgusting, but you also, earlier in this interview, you said it was so important to build bridges and to try to understand people with different views. So how do those two views sit together?
Well, I think, first and foremost, if this was a man who I truly believed was doing this based on some belief, I might be more curious about where he's coming from. But I think it is incredibly apparent that this is a man utilizing fear to create division in order to secure power. This isn't a man of true faith who believes there's something actually wrong here and is taking action on it. This is a man who, like Nero, believes if you divide, you can conquer, and he did. And the solutions to that are that people of diversity, who I think we've become a little drunk on our own successes. The LGBT community certainly has.
You mean a little complacent?
Well, I also think that it's not just complacency, it's that we're only fighting for our own causes. I remember walking up the steps of that Supreme Court worrying that we were so proud of ourselves and all the progress we had made that we had lost sight of how we got there, that we'd gotten there based on coalitions of the yeses, that any minority on their own is incredibly vulnerable. And you would hear the chants in our marches saying gay, straight, black, white, same struggle, same fight. But I didn't see a whole lot of LGBTQ people showing up visibly for the Black Lives Matter rallies. And that was dangerous. That means we were losing that coalition of the yeses that got Harvey Milk elected and that had gotten us so far to where we are today.
And from the passion I'm hearing in your voice and the determination you clearly have to keep fighting, I'm wondering whether you're still going to have to put the filmmaking on hold to continue this political fight.
Well, I'm doing some filmmaking that addresses the fight, which is When We Rise was built as a reminder and a warning, saying if we lose sight of our brothers and sisters in other social justice movements, we are very, very vulnerable. It's why it's called When We Rise, not When LGBTQ Rises. The characters in the show come from the women's movement, the Black civil rights movement, and this thing called the peace movement back in the late 60s, 70s that we seem to have completely forgotten about. And they are working for those causes as hard as they are working for this fledgling LGBTQ cause. I was writing that as a warning for us to get back to those coalitions so we couldn't be divided, so we could not be defeated, so the pendulum of progress would continue moving forward. And instead, we were divided, and we were conquered, and now it is a warning. And so I'm doing projects which show a path forward, that this is not unique to be in this position where the pendulum has swung so far back, where we face a backlash. It's a part of the process, but there's a way forward.
And a final personal thought. You've talked a lot about what drives your filmmaking, drives your activism, but you also said earlier in this interview that you can't deny your Mormon roots and you want a big family. You're married, you're happily married.
I'm married, yes.
Children is definitely something you want to embrace.
Absolutely.
Soon. Because I'm just wondering how you're going to fit all this in.
Well, you know, I mean, the wonderful thing about writing is you're always looking for distraction, and I'm sure that children will provide plenty of that. But it's also a thing that you do for a few hours a day before that part of your brain is a bit exhausted, and you need to open your eyes to the world, and no better eyes to help open your own than kids. So I'm really looking forward to putting my attention into raising children, to be able to look through their eyes, to make those mistakes and try and correct them, to learn more and more and more. And you know, it's why I've been in this fight for so long. It's about, for me, it's about family.
Dustin, Lance Black, we have to end there, but thank you for being on Hard Talk.
Thank you so much.
That was an edition of Hard Talk presented by me, Stephen Sacker.